One of the participants passing that up.
We got Michelle.
Our speaker.
No, our speaker's all here.
I think it's working.
All right, is this any better? Nope. Nope.
Hey, if we could ask everybody to themselves, that would help us. Yeah. What do you want to do? I'll just skip. What's that? You only do it once. All right, Jenny is going through and muting all who are not muted yet. And we're going to get started here in just a moment. Where are we getting so much beef? Michelle Smith is still unmuted. All right, we're going to get started here in just a moment. We're still having some issues with feedback on our end. I'm here. Now just that. We just don't have microphone. Do you want to go back to the phone? All right, I saw somebody say that they were still hearing an echo. Are you guys still hearing an echo?
No, you should be good now.
Yay! Okay, it does sound, yes, okay, everybody's saying much better, much better. All right, so again, thank you everybody for taking the time out in your day to see the presentation that we have prepared for you. Again, this is Melissa Milam, and I am here with the big variety of our folks here from Benchmark, and we're not showing anything at this point yet, but we have Jenny Falk, we have Laura Campbell, we have Scott Travis. We're not showing anything yet, just FYI, we haven't started showing the presentation yet. We'll do that here in just a moment. Melissa Milam here, the one talking, and we also have Kevin Strickland, who is here with us as well. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to get started here, and if you have any questions, we have a chat box over on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you have any questions, please type those in, and then as we have time, we will answer those questions. We'll go from there. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to get started. We're going to start the presentation now, where you're going to be able to see my screen, and let's go ahead and get started.
Hi, this is Kevin Strickland. I'm the owner of Benchmark ITS, and one of the products that we have on the market is ADVANSYS, which is the adult education management system, which we're going to be implementing in Utah as Utopia. Sorry, I got the wrong right off the bat. Okay, so what we wanted to do today is give you kind of a 30,000-foot view of the system as a whole of our company, to give you an idea of where we came from, what we do, and what you can expect in working with the system over the next several years. Again, our company is named Benchmark. We started in 2003. And we've been doing, we started initially with the idea of doing adult education from the beginning. Our main product for Benchmark is ADVANSYS. ADVANSYS is the management tool that allows the programs and the state to collect data. We collect data in real time. We do our calculations in real time. We do our reporting in real time. And it gives you, at the local level, at the teacher level, at the state level, the ability to get to your data and use the data to improve your performance. Obviously, we're compliant with Octave and WIOA and the NRS, and we're also very cognizant of state policy guidelines, and we implement those as often as we can. Our system is one of the leading systems in the country. We have regular consultations with people at the state administrative level and also at the federal level in order to make sure that we're following the rules and enforcing the rules as they go. Those of you that have been with this, with the adult education program since the WIA days, you know that particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a wealth of changes. We've gone from, collecting outcomes and having to have outcomes that are based on certain types of criteria to a number of other things. And we have made those changes along the way. We have a very strong record of compliance. The states and agencies using our system are really able to rely on the results that we have. I'm sorry, what?
Ha! There we go. Knew there was a reason I hired you. The one thing. The one thing, and it has now happened.
Hey, we have some people talking. Can you guys mute yourselves, please?
Somebody is watching a high school marching band. Sounds great. Okay. We're going to keep going. I hope you can hear me over the band. I thank you very much for having the band out for us. That was great. The other thing, we have a very committed help desk. We have a very strong help desk. Our help desk is here for you, and we take the issue seriously. If we take your input and your feedback in order to make our system better, no idea that you have is a bad idea. Doesn't mean we can always do it, but our system has been built over the last 15 years based on the ideas of the end users. We get our ideas from user group meetings. We get our ideas from again, the feds, and we also get our ideas from the state level. But we'd like to take information. You guys are the ones that work with the data on a day-to-day basis, and you know what works for you process-wise. And if we can help build workflows into our system that make it easier, we're going to do that. A little bit about me. I'm the president and owner of the company. I had no intention of being in the role that I'm in now. I went to system over the years from that platform. The people who work for our company, most of our company's been here for 5 years or more, 8 years in some cases. The people you'll most likely deal with would be myself, our COO, Jenny Falk, who's here today, Tim Turner, our development lead, who is not here today, Scott Travis, our other development lead, who is here today with us, Melissa, who is our training and support specialist. She'd be your first point of contact typically. Carrie Nichols, who does our GED fulfillment and support, and then Laura Campbell, who's with sales and marketing. Just to give you a little bit of background on the success of our system, in the last part of the WIA, the feds were giving out performance grants, and between 2010 and the end of the WIA program, the states using our system qualified for $11 million in workforce investment grants. Our system was disproportionately represented in the number of states that were receiving awards nationwide. People who were using our system tended to get better results. Another example, state of Rhode Island, in 2015 alone, got over $3 million in the performance incentive grants. And it's based on reports that came from our system and data they were able to collect and manage and monitor and maintain. Okay, a little bit about how the system works. That's where we're going to go now. First thing you need to know is our system is secure. It's easily accessed from any web device. Any of a number of varied locations. It can take place, you can work from, if you feel the desire to do so, you can work from the airport, you can work from your backyard, you can work while you're sitting next to the swimming pool. As long as you have an internet connection and can enter the data, that data goes straight to a central location where it's stored, and all the management and all the maintenance is taken care of in that area. We have the data at a central location, but the prime directive of this system from the very beginning is that if there's one student, there's one record. And we take all the information related to the class enrollment, to the attendance, to the assessment, to the outcomes, whether you're collecting family literacy, IEL and CE, IETP, all the other acronyms, any other types of registrations a student may have, any type of activity, all belongs to that one student. And it filters up to the student record from the class entries, from the POP entries, all the way to the individual student record, and it's maintained in that manner. We aggregate data from the lowest possible level. Our system is designed so that we can put in data at the most granular level possible. The idea is that information from the class level filters to the location, which filters to the program, which filters to the hub/consortia, or if you have groups of programs, and all that data filters to the state level, while it still maintains that unique one student, one record mantra. From a security standpoint, access to our system is limited by passwords. We will not know the passwords. The passwords are encrypted. They're encrypted during transmission. So even though you can change a password for someone who's under your jurisdiction in the system, you still will not know that password because they'll be forced to change it again when they log in. We try very, very, very hard to make sure that whoever's accessing the system is the person who has the rights and responsibilities in the system. No passwords are stored in a way that we can know them. No passwords are stored in a way that only the person who uses the password can actually know the password. And we've enforced timed out protocols in order to make sure that you don't leave your station and walk away and somebody can get into the system while you're there.
Somebody asked the question of whether or not they will be forced to change their passwords every 60 days. And yes, I believe that is going to be your state protocol. You will get notification when you log in if it has been 60 days to enter your old password and then to put in your new password and then put in your new password one more time to ensure that it has been saved. So yes, we do have that in place.
That will actually be every 90 days, not every 60 days.
Oh, every 90 days. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Yes.
From a permission standpoint, the system was initially developed so that data could be entered at the lowest possible level. In other words, the student level, and could be entered by a teacher. One of the first challenges that we actually had to overcome when we put the system in 2003 was that teachers were not accustomed to entering attendance for their own students. They would write it down on a sheet of paper, who would pass it to whoever was the head of the teachers, who would then take that information and pass it to a program director or a data entry specialist. So everything was being done on paper, but we wanted our system to be able to allow teachers to enter attendance on their own students on their own records. So our system is designed so that you can create permissions and roles in the system and give people permissions to certain classes. As teachers, you can give them permissions to entire programs or multiple programs. You can give them permissions as a program leader in one program and as a teacher in another program, so that we keep all that data aligned and where it's supposed to be. So our permission system is basically like an inverted triangle. The state administrator has all and can see all. The program administrator is limited to their specific program, and then teachers are limited to their programs and their classes. And we'll see a little of this as we go through. To give you an idea of what the permission system looks like, it's basically a point and click. So we have a huge array of different types of permissions that are in the system. Any function you can do in the system, we can make a permissionable action. So for instance, in this case, this user can edit class hours because that box is checked. Now we're going to get into the student management portion of the system. That's a little bit about who we are, where we came from, and how the system is structured. If there's any questions, we can stop here and go through that. But what I want to do now is go into the student management portion, so you can see how we manage a student's life cycle in our system. Okay. The first thing that you have in our system is you have the option for a student wait list. This is for situations where students are registering for classes or for entry into your program, but you may not have enough slots, or you may not be able to put them in the classes at the time that they ask. And we have a waitlist functionality, which basically allows the students, this is a version of what you would see if you were looking up the students who are on the waitlist, who have already entered their information into the system. To add a new student to the wait list, it can be done by the student with a forward-facing portal, which we may implement at some point later. And we will. Jenny says we will at a later point. I don't know the timeline in front of me, but the student will be able to enter the basic information and then search for classes and put themselves into class wait lists. And in this case, you put in the basic information to put the student on the wait list, and they're added to the wait list with the information that they put in. Adding the student to the wait list creates a profile in the wait list application, and then they choose the classes in which they want to be placed. Once that information is collected, they can either enroll in the system, and of course the enrollment would not say ADVANSYS, it would use Utopia for yours, and then they can add additional classes. Once they enroll in ADVANSYS, this is for one that's done multiple classes. And once they enroll in the system through the wait list, that will give them give the program access to the student registration information, which includes demographics, class placement, assessment information, where EFLs will be calculated, and we begin to create the student snapshot box in the system. This is an example of a student snapshot box as it's in the creation process. At the very top, it shows you the information that we've collected about the student, which is essentially that they've registered into the system, they've enrolled in the adult ed program. They've asked to be placed in 2 classes. Those classes were open. They've been placed in the class from the wait list. And we've begun the creation process. If you notice on the top part of the system, and you'll see this with your students as we go through the actual training in a couple of weeks, you'll see that the information about enrolled in the program, whether the POP has 12 approved hours, has a measurable skills gain, etc. All that information will gradually fill in as you complete the data for this particular student. The first step in our process is to choose the contact type. For students who are registered for NRS purposes in our system, you have to select an NRS registration. So you'll have to create an NRS registration for the student, and there may or may not be, depending on state policy, other types of registrations. One that we know will be in place will be the IETP. That will be a different type of registration that you will apply to students who are in the IETP programs. Some of our other clients use things like college transitions, family literacy, and there's a whole host of other possibilities. And we'll work with your state administrator to determine which of those options are available. So at this point, you're going to choose the registration date for the student, the contact type for the student, whether they're ABE/ASE or ESL at entry. All of these are data validation information. So for instance, if you select the registration date and you put today's date, our system will not allow you to enter assessments prior to that registration date, because we try to keep everything in the system logically sequential. So your registration date is going to be essentially your first date of contact. When you choose ABE/ASE or you choose ESL, that choice will limit the tests that are available when you go into the assessment entry populations. If you're doing an ESL student, you're not able to enter tests that are designated for ABE/ASE. That helps us keep track of your EFL, keeps track of your measurable skills gain. We went through that process. We created a student now, and now you see that the contact type has been added to that snapshot box on the right-hand side, so that we know that it's ABE and ASE. And as you go through the intake process, there's a progress bar at the bottom that you'll see that has the demographics, the NRS registration, intake, etc. As each of those processes are complete, those buttons will change color to indicate that they've been completed. One thing I did neglect to mention, our company's based in Alabama, and most of us have lived here or around here most of our lives. So if there's an accent problem, I apologize in advance. I have not yet found a G that I can't drop, and it's not intentional. It just happens, and I apologize in advance for that. Oh, good. Thank you.
Demographic. Okay, you said a G in there.
Okay. This is a demographic portion of when you're entering the student information into the site. We mark the fields that are required by Octave in red so that you know that they're required. And we also will not let this page be processed until that information is filled out. We will take your state's demographic intake form, and we'll work with the state as closely as possible the next couple of weeks to tailor the flow of this page so that it matches what your intake form looks like as much as possible. if there are specific questions that the state asks on their demographic that are not asked nationally, for instance, we can include those during the demographic process to make sure that those questions are asked. Again, anything that's marked in red is required. We'll work with the state to determine which of those fields will definitely be required and which ones will not be required, and work with your state to mirror the intake forms, absolutely. Once you've completed the demographic form, and it's unfortunately slightly longer than that, the addition of the barriers to employment really lengthen that process, honestly. But those are basically required, most of that, and we do have to include that, but it lengthens that process. But once you've completed the demographic entry, you come to the class placement. Right, and if you notice across the top, that progress bar, those change from green to red when they're completed, which in my mind is the reverse, but in the developer world, red means stop, you've done it, so that's how that works. This is a student that carried over from the wait list, so this student already had the classes that they were going to be placed. They already had those classes in their profile, and they've been placed in these classes with the date that was assigned during the intake process. If you wanted to add additional classes for the student, this is what a sample student class placement form looks like. The classes are listed in the left-hand column. The instructors listed in the middle column. The third column is when you create a class in our system, you have the option to establish a class size. Now, for instance, if you're limited in space, you can set the class size down, from a minimum of 25 to a maximum of 40. Or you can say, if it's a very small class, you can limit it down to 10. You can limit it down to whatever you want to limit it to, or you can make the class unlimited if you have unlimited space, or it's an online class, etc. But during the class creation process, you're going to set up the class size. You're going to set up the beginning and the ending dates for the class, and you're going to set up the times that the class is scheduled to meet. When you get to the student profile and you're adding classes for the student, adding a student to the class is as simple as finding the class in the list and checking the box to the right-hand side, and then processing that page to go on. Okay, now we're going to talk about assessments. Assessments in our system, we base the available assessments on, first, what is approved by Octave, second, what's approved by state policy, and then third, what contact type that has been chosen for the student. So in this case, a student who's ABE ASE is only going to see tests that are ABE ASE valid. And if your state policy only allows you to do TABE 9 and 10 or TABE 11 and 12, for instance, you'll only be able to choose TABE 9 and 10 or 11 and 12 as your test series or test battery to begin with. When you put tests into the system, those tests will automatically create an entering EFL for the students. Any subsequent tests after that will automatically determine whether or not the student has a measurable skills gain. So all of that is calculated on the fly at the student level. And as you go through the process, you can see that in several different areas. You can see it reflected in the test record. You can see it reflected on your reports. You can see it reflected in the student snapshot box, which we'll show you as we go. This is a representation of what a student's assessment entry looks like. If you look at the left-hand side, the series entry tells you what you've chosen for the student, the date that the series of tests was started, what the entering functioning level is. It shows that they're entered, shows who entered the test, it shows when they were entered, and then the right-hand portion of this shows the history of the tests that were entered for that series. And when we get into training, I'm going to explain the traditional, non-traditional, which is the third line, the justification line. That's a little bit deeper concept than a general overview, and we will definitely go through that in training. But this is what the basic adding a pretest looks like. Now, one thing I do think you probably noticed at this point are the three red circles with X's. We have an approvals process in our system. So in order for these tests to actually be committed to the student record, they have to be approved. And until they're approved, you can go in and edit the test, you can delete the test, you can do anything you want to with the test. But once you've approved that test, it's going to automatically lock it into the student so that we can build upon it when we're with a subsequent post-test in order to create the EFL calculations and do all the processing that we need to do. One of the reasons we have to do the approvals is because we calculate everything automatically. And if you don't approve the test and lock it into the student record, then, you know, if you can go and back test out, you know, that were after or back the pre-test out after you enter the post-test, et cetera, it creates a collapsing pyramid. So from our standpoint, you have to get the test approved, and we'll show you approvals in just a second. And then you also, from the screen, and this is for every test that you enter in the system, not only can you see what was done, you can see who did it and when. So now we put the student in the system. We have a contact type. They've been enrolled. The entry process will show as you go through the system. Okay. One of the things that I did want to notice at the top, as each of those are completed, and this slide is actually out of order, but as each of those are completed, when the pre-tests are in and approved, there'll be a green check mark next to the pre-tested box. If the student's post-tested in the physical, there'll be a green check mark next to the post-tested box. So as each of those pieces are completed for that student record, the green check marks will be there to show you what's been done so that you can see at a glance if you're missing anything for that student. Every state in our system has MSG that's an acronym for Measurable Skills Gain. It used to be completion in old terminology. It used to be a gain. That's another term. We've sort of adopted the MSG, Measurable Skills Gain terminology that's come out of the WIA system, or WIOA system lately. But that's what a MSG is, a Measurable Skills Gain. And it occurs in our system on a test-by-test basis. So if a student tests in TABE 10 math at level 1 and TABE 10 reading at level 3, and they take a subsequent TABE 9, and the level 3 goes to a level 4, we do consider that to be a measurable skills gain, and as recently as a year ago had that confirmed by Octave that we do look at a test-to-test basis.
The question was asked if there will be an area in which you can go and practice and put your information into the system before committing it to the production system. Yes, absolutely. We have that for everybody who uses the software. That's going to be available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That is a great place for you to go and practice entering your data before you do commit it. It'll give you an opportunity to see where your students will land on your different reports and tables. Definitely, yes, we will have that available for you. We'll give that link to you. That's actually going to be the site that we will be using when we are out there in person for the training. That was a good question, Mark. Thanks for asking it.
A couple other things in terms of entering a student into the system. You'll have the opportunity to designate a student as IETP as a registration type. And that's a list of some of the registration types that we have in other programs, EL Civics, Enrichment, HSC Credentials, IETP, NEDP, et cetera. And we'll work with the state to limit that list to only those that are applicable. You also have the option to mark a student as participating in IEL and CE if the program is designated as an IEL and CE provider. So you'll have those options to enter for the student as well. This is a little bit of information that you see in the student profile. This is under the snapshot box on the same page. Each of these fields will be collapsible. So if you wanted to see information about their registration, you can expand it. If you wanted to see information about their status measures, the information that was entered, you can see that. Assessment reporting, class placement history, and then we also have case notes. Case notes are individual entries about the student that can be entered by anyone in the system who has access to the student record. That actually originated from a situation we had about 2007, I think, 2006 or 2007, where a student was aggressively hostile towards one of the teachers in the program, and they wanted a way to notify other programs that if the student came there to enroll, they'd had that issue. So we created a case note section so that any type of information can be put about the student. It could be, something as simple as I made an adjustment to his record to change a test score. It could be, a situation where the student was hostile and you needed to notify. But keep in mind that when you put in a case note, it is visible to anybody who accesses the student record. And again, we'll go through a lot of this in more detail in training, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of what we have. Next step in the process is attendance entry. And I want to talk a little bit about how we generate the attendance entry fields themselves. Attendance entry, when you go to enter attendance for a student, your options are based on 3 different sets of criteria, essentially. They're based on the student class placement date. So when you're entering information for a student and you place the student into a class on March 31st, 2018, you're not going to be able to enter attendance for that student in that class on February 3rd of the same year, because the class placement date begins the student's participation in that class. And the second piece of that puzzle is the class schedule. And when you create a class in the system, you'll have the option to choose that it meets Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from, say, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then when you go and enter attendance, when you look up the class schedule, it's going to pull every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from the beginning of the student's participation until the last date that you're entering attendance, and it'll give you the options for those dates only. The third piece of that puzzle is the beginning and end date of the class. So during the class creation piece, when you create the class, you'll be asked to give it a beginning date and an ending date. So if the class begins on July the 1st, you can't go back to June 30th to enter attendance for students in that class. And one other piece that's not listed in this diagram now is we have broken our attendance out into face-to-face classes, which are direct instruction in a classroom setting, essentially, or one-on-one. And then we have online curriculum, which is a separate component. So you can have classes that are either face-to-face or online learning. But what we found over the last year or two in particular is that most of the classes are trending towards a hybrid of both. So we also have the option to choose hybrid classes. And when you choose the hybrid class option, you can enter your face-to-face direct contact hours for the student who's in the class during that time, and also enter the online curriculum hours at the same time in the same process. Okay, when you first go to enter attendance, we collect attendance at 2 separate levels. We first collect the attendance for the class itself, and the schedule that you'll see is based on the beginning and ending dates of the class. It's based on the days that you have selected for the class to meet, and it's based on the hours that you selected the class would meet. For instance, if the class was scheduled to meet on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 to 11 a.m., you're going to get every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between the beginning and ending span of the filter that you placed to enter attendance, with a block filling with 2 hours apiece. If you've also selected that the class is an online curriculum class, and you've chosen that you're going to enter the hours on a weekly basis, then you'll have another block where you can enter online curriculum hours on a weekly basis as well for that same time period. And what you're looking at in the first screen is the hours that the class was available for the student to participate. And we have this function in the system because some of our states do like to run comparison results of how many hours the class was available versus how many hours a student attended. And then they can take those 2 pieces of information, and they can also extrapolate it further into, what percentage of students achieved a measurable skills gain or got a GED or whatever the desired outcome for the class is, and they can actually look at, the value of instructions. They can see how many hours the class was scheduled, how many the student attended, and what the percentage of successful completion is for those students who attended X number of hours or higher. That's the genesis of that whole entire part of the system. Once you save the teacher and class hours, you go over to the student hours. One thing that we have toyed with, it was my original intention that all the student hours would be automatically filled in based on the class hours that met. But we have had requests from every state administrator that we dealt with to this point to make the hour 0 and force them to actually fill in the legitimate number of hours, because apparently they had some instances where the hours were just being pushed through. So when you get to the student hours, you do have to actually enter those for the days that the student hours met. But we have an attendance sheet if you don't want the teacher to enter these hours on a daily basis. We have an attendance sheet that you can actually fill out that mirrors the system so that they can put that information in. So you would put in the number of hours that the student met. You cannot exceed the number of hours that the class was scheduled to meet. If you notice the second block, we put in a 5. The class was scheduled to meet only 2 hours. So you can't exceed the number of hours that the class was supposed to meet. Once you've entered an hour for the student or made an entry and gone to the next, you see the little green, that's a flag, I believe. The green flag shows that information has been entered into the student record, and you don't have to do anything else from that point. So every time you enter that information in those blocks, it's ported over to the student record. One thing about our system, and I hope it's valuable to you, but if you look at the different places in the system where things are underlined, you can get directly to the student's record by clicking on their name if there's something that you see that's not right. You can get directly to their information by clicking on a phone number. There are always other ways to get to things in the system. We have links spread throughout the system in order for you to be able to access information there. When you go to the actual student record when attendance has been entered, we have a grid display that shows all the attendance that's been entered for the student. It shows whether or not it shows the classes. It shows the dates that the class met, the total hours for the student's attendance. It shows the NRS hours, non-NRS hours, because we do have some programs that have classes that are designated as not NRS. They're for other types of instruction, and we keep track of that as well. You have the attendance type, whether it's direct or online, and then you also have whether or not it's been approved. And then there's a number of ways you can break this information down. You can break it down to show, right now it's set to show 50 entries on the page. You can change that number to smaller or more. You can break it down by period of participation. If the student has been in multiple periods of participation, you can see the attendance in each one individually. You can break it down to where you look at just the hours for each class. You can break it down to where it just shows the hours by fiscal year, because sometimes you have students who begin a period of participation in one fiscal year and it carries over into the next. So we have a number of ways that you can sort this information on the student attendance record, and it's a very good tool in order for you to keep track of that information. From this page, you can also export the student attendance information into Excel file, CSV, or you can port it off to a PDF file for viewing. Post-test entry. When you enter a post-test for the student, a couple of things we have in place that are fairly valuable. One is a improvement requirement. When you go to enter a test for the student, there are 2 places you can check to find out what the student needs to achieve on his post-test in order to obtain a measurable skills gain. If you check the little elbow arrow next to the contact type, it will generate this information. And there's also a link at the top of the test page that will generate the same information. And it tells you that the student is taking TABE 9 and 10. Their last test was on You can look at this information on a student-by-student basis. You can also see the same information, and hopefully we'll get a chance to show you some live data in a moment. You can also see the same information on the at the class level. You can go and pull up an entire class and see every student who's in the class, and you can look at a glance, see every possible requirement to achieve a measurable skills gain by their testing. You have to follow the same basic protocols. So if you started with TABE 9 and 10, you have to finish with TABE 9 and 10, or follow up with TABE 9 and 10. Once you have pre-tested and post-tested, you can then at that point change to another test battery if you wanted to switch to 11, 12, or whatever might be available. But if you pre-test in TABE 9 and 10, you do have to post-test in TABE 9 and 10. You have to follow the same basic pattern. If your pre-test was on July 1st, 2017, you can't do a post-test on 6/30/2017. Your post-test has to be after your pre-test, and we enforce date validation there as well. And then again, this is what the post-test entry looks like. It will show you who entered the test, whether or not it's been approved, what date it was approved, what date it was entered. The action, we've actually changed that now. That shows whether or not they've achieved a measurable skills gain. It just says yes or no. So that's a new feature we just put in. We took, over the last year in particular, there's been a de-emphasis at the federal level at Octane on what the overall functioning level for the student is. You know, we spent the last 12 years before this essentially looking at, you know, all three tests and what do all three TABE tests, math, reading, and language, what's the overall EFL based on the lowest score of those three tests. That's less emphasis now. They're more interested in improvement on the individual test level. So the overall functioning level is not as valuable any longer. So we have actually changed that line where it says functioning level on the post-test to show measurable skills gain, whether they did or they did not achieve a measurable skills gain.
And there's a question regarding understanding the approval concept.
Yes.
Who approves things that are entered is the question.
Okay, who approves things that are entered? That's actually going to be determined during our analysis with the state. We will create a permission in the system typically for program administrators to go in and approve data that's been entered by people at the data entry level. The concept behind this entire system was that you could have people entering data, but since the program administrator has the ultimate responsibility for the data that's been entered, we give them a chance to review that information and see what it's going to look like and make sure that the data is entered correctly. There's not like an anomaly that needs to be fixed or whatever, to go through the approvals process. And we'll show you the approvals in just a second. But during really it's determined by the roles that we set up at the state level. When the state tells us what role, helps us determine what roles we're going to put into the system. And then at the program level, when you're creating new users and putting the new users into the system, you'll have the option of, again, based on state policy, of whether you can assign approval permissions to certain people in your program or not. But as we go through the process of building the permissions in the system, that'll be a little more clearly defined. But just a typical standpoint, we have teachers who enter data, we have program administrators, and then those program administrators typically have people who are under them who have responsibility for reviewing and approving data. And of course, small programs don't have that. But again, this is what it looks like after you have approved the test. And the snapshot box now shows that there's a measurable skills gain. The little stars there just for representation. It won't show up on your screen. But it does show that there's an EFL gain. It shows what date it was achieved, so that when you look at the student's record, you can automatically tell what has been done for the student. And if you look at the information above also, you can see that the check marks have begun to fill in. They've got a measurable skills gain in the fiscal year. They post-tested in the fiscal year. They pre-tested in the fiscal year. Their registration is complete, and they have enrolled in the program. But you can look at this at a glance, and you can tell that this student is not going to be on the federal tables because their POP has not reached 12 hours of attendance. Until that POP has 12 hours, the POP is not actually valid. So now we get into the approvals. I'll show you what it looks like. In our system, we do approvals on NRS registrations, which is the contact type, etc. We do, do approvals on profile changes, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a moment. We do approvals on test scores. We require approvals on class hours on attendance. We require approvals on outcomes, and if there are state goals, and this is something that will work with your state to determine whether or not we're going to even include state goals. But if there are state-specific goals, sometimes those also have to be approved. Profile changes. I like to tell stories, so I'm going to tell a brief story about this one. We never thought to include this, but we have certain states that use our system who have programs that are in very close proximity to another. And you would have a student who would go to one program and take classes in the morning, go to another program and take classes in the evening. And some of the funding outside the system was based on which county the student resided in. So we had a situation where the student's address was being changed in the morning and changed again at night, and changed back in the morning and changed back again at night. So we were asked to find out why that was happening, and it basically boiled down to the fact that each program wanted that student to live in their county in order to get credit for the student in some other outside thing they were doing to get some additional funding. So we had to put the profile changes in, and what we check for in profile changes, if somebody goes into a student and changes their name, if they go into a student and they change their identification number, they change their social security number, they change their tax ID number that we store, they change their state ID number, or if somebody goes into the student and changes their physical address, we do track that information, and we do require somebody to review that change and make sure that it's legitimate. The approval process is really quite simple. What you're looking at now is you're looking at student registrations. From here, you can see that the student was entered with a registration date. You can see the program in which the student was registered. And again, if you're in the system as a program administrator, you're only going to see your program. If you're in as a state administrator, you'll see multiple programs. So at any point in time, the state can actually go in and look at the approval list and break it down by program and see what still needs to be approved. But this also shows you the students entered into the system. It shows you their entering functioning level. And it shows you classes in which the student's been enrolled. Back up just 1 second. The idea of approving is actually really simple. All you really have to do is click on the individual student record to approve, or if every record in the system looks correct, you can check the all button and it will approve all of those. If you decline a student registration, it will remove all this information from the system and they'll have to start over for that student. But again, the approval process, and one of the things that we've noticed in all the implementations that we've done is that typically at the very beginning, there's some, I wouldn't say pushback, but there's some concern that the approval process is going to be overwhelming. It's going to be unwieldy. It's going to be more work than people are really ready to do. But at the end of the day, usually we find out within the first year or so that people don't want to lose the approval process, because it does give them some ability to control what's being entered into the system, especially when they're responsible for that information.
There was a question about remove it from the whole system or just from our system at our school. It would be all of Utopia.
Right. If you delete a student, okay. Well, it actually works both ways. If you delete a student's registration and the student is already in the system in another program, it's not going to do anything to the other program's registration, right, but it will remove that registration from your program. If it's a new student who has no other registrations, no other information, when you remove the student from the program, it just simply erases them from the system, from Utopia. separating students in our system. The best way to separate students in our system is to do it by the NRS separation report. One of the things that we found over the years is that removing students on an individual basis is time consuming, and it's difficult to track which students should be removed at which time, etc. So we created a methodology for you to go into the system. You can see a list of every student who has not attended in the last 90 days. And if that student has not attended in the last 90 days, we owe a rule, they're supposed to be separated from the system. Now, we also include in that word, quote unquote, attendance, we include activity, because we have found that programs will give a student a test on March 31st, for instance, and their last date of attendance may have been March 27th. So when you separate a student, we're actually looking at the last date of activity, not necessarily just attendance. But when you go into the system, you'll see the list of students who haven't attended. You'll see a link to the student's name, and each of those columns are sortable.
The question was asked if they have to memorize the class numbers. For the purposes of the demonstration, we created classes that have numbers as the naming methodology. However, dependent upon whatever your state policies are, is going to determine the way that you name your classes. More often than not, you're not going to have numbers. So no, you will not have to remember any numbers, unless, of course, you're interested in using the course IDs that are created. Of course, that's a completely different conversation for which we'll have when we actually get out there and do training. But no, you'll not have to remember any numbers.
Right. In a typical situation, instead of class 144, that would read face-to-face night class, and you might have the instructor's last name attached to it as well.
Yep.
From this NRS separation report, each of the columns are sortable. So when you click on the name, it will sort it from alphabetically. When you click on the registration date, it'll sort by high to low, last day of attendance, high to low, total approved hours, etc. But the last column is a planned return date. One of the things in the system is, if you look at the fine print on your federal tables, Table 4 says that you should separate a student after 90 days of non-activity or non-attendance when the student has no plans for further instruction. Well, we have programs that close for a certain period of time, and you know that they're going to come back, and you know that the student is planning to come back. So rather than separating the student after 90 days, we do give you the option of entering a planned return date, and the planned return date can go as far as 180 days out. And then if the student does not return within 180 days, then they have to be separated. We do run a process in the background, and we'll work with the state office to determine whether or not we're going to implement this at all, or on what interval we'll implement it. But we do run a process in the background where after 180 days, we automatically separate students from the system, because if you're looking at the follow-up process for Table 5, it begins the second quarter after exit. And if we're not exiting the students appropriately, then your follow-up report.
Yes, we have an alerts section. This report that we're looking at right now, the NRS separation report, is a very good place to start because it is defaulted to 90 days. But then we also have some alerts that we have under the student management option on the side of your screen when you're logged into Utopia, well, when you'll be logged into Utopia, that you can look at and use some of the filtering that we have available to look at a variety of dates from 15 all the way up to, I think it goes up to 90 days. So you can see who that population is and make some determinations on whether or not you need to enter attendance within 15 days on up to 90 days. So we do have a couple of places in which you can see what that population is.
And from this report, that they only appear on this report after they have not had activity in 90 days. But from this particular report, you can separate each student on the list by clicking on the link on the left-hand side, and then choosing a separation reason for that student for each one. And then you process them all at once. The system will ask you to confirm that you want to process those students as being separated, and you process them out, and it processes them out of their classes and out of their NRS registration.
We do have some notifications up at the top. One of the notifications states that all attendance hours have to be approved. So in the event Steve Walker had been in the 2 classes that we're showing here, it's been 52.25 hours since he had had attendance. If 2.25 of those hours had not been approved, you are going to not be able to separate him until all of the 52.25 hours have been approved.
Okay.
Question. How will the system work for programs that do not have specific classes at, hang on, let me pull up the question, it disappeared for me.
How will the system work for programs that do not have specific classes and specific hours? Will there be a multi-level?
We have a long-term solution, but between now and the time you begin using the system, we're going to come up with something that will work for you. We currently do not have, for lack of a better word, free-range classes. All of our classes are structured and regimented based on the times that they're set, but there are ways that we can help you work around that. Was there another question about approvals, Melissa, before we go?
No.
Okay. This is just one of the, oh, I'm sorry. Also manual separation. You can separate students on an individual basis from the system if you choose to do that. But for our purposes, it seems to be a much better process if you use the NRS separation report. The manual separation requires you to enter a separation date and a separation reason and remove the student from the program. Student leaves the program and comes back. What do you do at that point? The first thing you'll do is you'll look up the student we suggest, and we'll go over this in training. We suggest a combination of first name, last name, and in particular birth date. We have found over the years, from a best practices standpoint, it's much more likely that the birth date will be correct than the first name and last name or the spelling thereof. So using the birth date often helps find the right person. When you find the right person, you can see that they were in the program, they were enrolled in program 23, which would actually have a name and not a number. And they were enrolled from 7/1/2016 to 12/1/2016. You can open that student's profile. You can open that student's profile, and then you can go in and add your NRS registration. And you basically go through the same process that we went through before we entering a new student. You enter that information, you get to review their demographics and make sure the information is correct, and then you go from there.
Will the new system show the offender number?
We do have, I'll have to defer to Scott on that, but we do have a place to show their DLC number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do have a place to store the inmate number, so the answer to that is yes.
If it's in there now, it'll be in there later.
So one of the things that usually comes up when we do, especially the demonstrations, is how are we going to verify and certify that the data that we have in the system is correct and timely? And we have a number of alerts that are built into the system. We have a number of reports that are built into the system. We have other ways to validate the system, validate the data. So I want to go through some of those right quick. The very first thing that you're going to come to when you create your profile and you log into the system for the first time is you're going to come to a dashboard. The dashboard is your dashboard alone. Each person who logs into the system has their own configurable dashboard that they can manage, manipulate, change the parameters for, create whatever they want to create out of it to show data that they need to see. It may be important for one program to show the number of, maybe you need to know how many students are male versus how many are female. and that may be of no value to somebody else in the program, and they create their dashboard in a completely different way. But on the initial landing page for the system, you can create up to 8 different graphs using any combination of data that we have in the system available for the graphs. And then from those graphs, you can actually do some on-the-fly filtering. For instance, in the graph on the left, if you wanted to see only the females that were enrolled, you can click on the little blue button next to males, and the males will disappear from that graph, and you can see only the females. You can edit these graphs at any time. You can create them at any time. You can have graphs for different fiscal years. So one thing that we next to it, they'll put a graph. They can get in just a basic sense of where were we last year versus where are we. A page like this that will show you the names of those 25 students and some basic information about each of the students as they go across. This report can also be, this report can also be exported to a CSV or an Excel file. So if you want to do further manipulation on this information, you can do that. Each of the columns is sortable across the top. But this is an example of this is one of the places you can go just to get a general sense of how your program is performing, and you can get other, compared to last year, et cetera, or just compared to other items in the same program. Again, we've talked about approvals. I'm not going to belabor the approvals, but that's one of the ways that we use our system to verify the accuracy of the data. When the data has been entered at one level, the people who are over that person who's entered the data or have jurisdiction over the approvals can go in and they can look at the approvals. I showed you a minute ago what the approvals look like for an NRS registration. This is what they look like for test scores. So not only do you see the test scores that are entered, but you also see the previous test scores. The rationale behind that is it gives you an idea if a student jumps from 212 on a TABE 10 math and they jump all the way to a 640, you may have a question about whether that score is accurate or not. And it gives you the opportunity to look at the scores that were previously entered, see the scores that are currently entered, shows you how many hours they've taken since the previous test, and it gives you an opportunity to go in and look at that information. One of the things in our system that we're extremely pleased with how it functions is the reporting system. We have a report queuing system that allows you to go in and create reports to be run not only at the time that they're being run, but to be stored in a historical basis. So you can go and generate a report today and come back and run that exact same report a week later as long as you store it in the queue system. You can also create, for instance, if you need tables 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can create table 1, and while it's generating, go and create table 2, and they'll all be stored in this list, and they'll show you which report it is, what format it was generated in, and whether or not it's either queued, being generated, or ready. This allows you to do multiple things at once, and we are almost done with a scheduling portion of this, which will actually allow you to go in and schedule reports to be run at certain times. For instance, if you want to see a table 4 every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, you can go into the report scheduler, set that report to run every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and when you come in at Monday morning at 8:05 with your cup of coffee, the report will already be run and sitting there waiting for you to generate. That's where we're headed with the reports. Right now, you can put everything into the queue and view the reports, but we're building the scheduler in so that you can actually schedule the reports as well. We'll keep, we currently keep reports in the queue for at least 90 days, and we'll work with you to make sure that that's a valid amount of time. When you create a report, a federal report in our system, and you generate it out of the queue in an Excel spreadsheet file, not only do you get the report and you get the list of the criteria used to run it, and you get the summary of the report, but you also get drill down details so that you can go into the report and you can look and see if there were 3,203 students that you had in the system who were on the report. You can look at that 3,203 and go to the drill down details and see exactly who they were. And you can filter these reports so that you could go over to the right-hand side where we also keep the information on whether or not they have an EFL, whether or not they have an HSE, and you can filter this report to show only those students so you can actually match the numbers to the names. A couple of other reports that we have in the system, we have testing alerts. We have the testing alerts are there to show you students who have had a certain number of attendance hours entered but have not had a test. We know there are state policy guidelines for, how many hours of instruction should elapse before a student is tested, and we want to make sure that those students are being tested at the right intervals. So we give you a testing alert that will show you students who have not tested within X number of hours or more. That's currently set at 40 by state default, but Melissa, have we changed that to where it's configurable?
We have some additional filters now, yeah.
That's right now it's a coded parameter, but we have changed that in the system that you're going to get, that you can choose the number of days, so it's not set to a certain amount. On the opposite side of the same coin, we have attendance alerts, which shows you students who have been in the system and have not had attendance hours entered for X number of days. And this goes hand in hand with the NRS separation report. This report now is also filterable, so you can set it to 15, you can set it to 60, you can set it to 45. So you can look, you can set the report to 60, see the students that are nearing that 90-day threshold so that you know you need to work with them. One of the other alerts that we have in the system is the unenrolled students. So students who have been enrolled in a program but are currently not residing in a class. There is a report that shows you the students who are in that situation. It may be that the student needs to be placed in a class. It may be that the student needs to be separated, but at least you know the students who are not actively engaged with the program, because if they're not in a class, they can't have attendance. Another report that we have in place is an NRS progress report. This will allow you to generate a list of students who are in the system, and it will tell you what steps they are missing in order to have their NRS registration complete and appear on the federal table. This is a really simple way to go when you run your report. Say you run a table 4 and you think you should have 290 students, but you've only got 245. This is a very simple report that you can run that will show you students who should possibly be on the report, but they're missing one of the components in order to qualify. Another management report we have in the system is the duplicate students report. Duplicate student report, we try very hard to minimize duplicates on entry. So if you try to enter a student with the same social security number, the system's not going to let you. If you try to enter a student with the same first name, last name, and birth date, the system is going to warn you that there are students in the system who currently match that criteria, and will ask you if you're sure if you want to continue. We have had situations where we found people who have the same first name, last name, and birth date, but it's rare. But we do have a report that will give programs and state administrators the ability to go into the system and look and see students who possibly are the same student and maybe should be merged. Typically what we find is students will use their first name for one program and use that same as their last name for another program, or maybe they entered it backwards, but they'll have the same birth date, they'll have a similar address. And this is a way that you can take those records and merge them into one student, because again, our goal is always for one student to have one record. It's a mathematical impossibility to eliminate every possible duplicate in the system, but we try very hard to make sure that we don't have those whenever possible. And this is one way you can merge them together when we find them. We have a student participation report that's built into the system. It's run on a program by program basis. So your program can go and look and see how many students you have, how many hours those students have at each particular level, how many have completed, how many have advanced, how many have remained in the system, et cetera, how many have separated. So it's, again, it's a report that you can go into the system, you can run, you can get a general idea of where your system stands in terms of the various participation. One of the things that I'm going to go over real quickly that we have in the system is the outcome call list. I don't know how many of your programs, and we'll get into this again when we get into training, I don't know how many of your programs actually do telephone call surveys in order to do follow-ups. I think there's a combination of both. They do some data matching, you do some, you can do some entry by hand. But one of the things that we have built into our system is an outcome call list. And again, with a short story, years ago, I worked for a company that did marketing for awards. We did ribbons, we did plaques, we did trophies, and we had a bank of people who would call organizations and try to get them to buy these ribbons and these trophies and these books and these awards and plaques that were printed with their information on it. And in order for those people to make those phone calls in an expedient manner, so that so the information would come up, they would make their phone call, they would hang up with their phone call, the next bit of information would come up for them to make the next call, so they're always working on what they're supposed to be working on. That part of that product eventually got picked up by one of the telephone companies. So if you were getting phone calls back in say 90 something from telephone companies wanting to know if you were satisfied with your service, there's a fairly decent possibility that I actually worked on the code for the system that allowed them to do that. And I'm going to apologize to all of you now for that, for my participation in that. But the good part of that is that through that work, I did learn how to make the outcome call list function in a very similar way. So the outcome call list in our system, you'll generate a list of students who fit into certain criteria. It could be employed in the second quarter, you're checking for a certain quarter, you're looking for the employment, and then you'll generate the entire list of students and you'll filter it through a number of options. And when you generate the list of students, you'll have the ability to review the list first, export it into a file if you just want to copy it somewhere else to take a look at it. But you can also go and begin to work on the list by choosing add or edit from the follow-up portion of that section. The first thing that comes up is a screen that keeps track of what happens with the initial call. So if a student or someone answers the phone, you'll click on the number and it will automatically fill the phone number to the side so that you know where you called. If there was a call action is for calls that are not completed. So if there's no answer, if they tell you to call back at a specific time, you can actually log that information into the repeat date and the repeat time. For instance, if you call somebody and they say, if you can call back on next Tuesday, but at 10 o'clock in the morning, they'll be here. You can actually log that there, and you can go and generate a list based on calls that need to be made at a certain time. But should the person happen to answer the phone, then you continue to the survey. We have a script built into the system, and the script will be configurable. We'll work with your state administrators to make sure that we're asking or following the right pattern for the script. You'll ask the survey questions. Did you have a job? If you did, yes, then that's going to help complete the things for Table 5. What was the pay scale? Was it weekly or monthly? We'll calculate the quarterly earnings based on what you enter there. And then once you save the survey, it goes directly to the student record. It shows that the survey was completed. The student was employed in the second quarter. It shows what date the outcome was entered. And then without having to go back and generate the list, you choose the next call on the list and you go right down the list of calls. Any point that you stop, everything is saved to that point. When you go back and regenerate the list, you can exclude phone calls that have already been made. You can look back and only see the ones that are scheduled to be called back at a certain time or called back period. But I used a lot of the functionality that we had in that telephone survey script so that people could sell long distance telephone calls when that was actually a thing. And we incorporated that into the outcome call list to make it flow better and to give people who are using this list a more productive tool. This is actually a little more for the state side than it is for the local programs, but I'm going to go through just a little bit about data import because some of it will be applicable. We do have the ability to import data from student data from spreadsheets and other type of information, as long as you have the basic fields that are required. If you have the first name, last name, you have their date of birth, you have a gender, a city, state, etc. And we can import that. We can import that information directly into the student file, which in some cases we have programs that they bring a lot of students in from say a one-stop or another program, or not another program, but another agency that they're importing students, and they may have a list of 10 or 15 students they want to bring in. We give you the functionality to import those students on all at once, as opposed to having to hand enter all that information that you already have. This is just a list of the file requirements that are required when you import that information, and it tells you what is required, what is not, what you have to have, and if you notice there, letter O is the inmate number. So you can enter that information directly so that you don't have to hand enter it if you have it in if you have it from another source in a spreadsheet, etc. And we are in the process right now of importing all the data that you currently are using. So you won't have to do this for any of your current students or any students that are in the system as of what date, Scott? We don't know that yet.
We don't know that yet.
Yeah, but as of a date in the
cutover,
as of the cutover date, you won't have to do that for any of those. But like down the road, if you have you're working with another agency and you bring in 10 or 15 students and you have this information in the spreadsheet, you can enter it in. And once you've entered it, you'll have to go in and once you go in, you'll have to go in and edit the student's bio and go from there. Go next one. From the state, we do have outcome data export, so they can export data to do data matching with the other outside agencies. One of the reasons I included this is because during the intake process for a student, you'll have to mark whether the students agree to data matching. If they don't agree to data matching, they're not going to be on this form. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That's what the data export looks like when it's brought out to Excel. Then you have the outcomes import, and this is probably process that we have in place. We'll be working with GED testing so that we will pull down all the results from GED. Any student who has a candidate ID that matches in our system will be automatically matched across. So any results from the GED will post to their adult ed, to the adult ed system. We also have a social security number match. So if the social security number directly matches between the student on the Utopia side and the student on the GED side, that student will automatically match, so that anything that happens on the GED side will be put on the student's adult ed record for Table 4 purposes, for Table 5 purposes, etc.
I have a question that they're wondering if the GED with all the states.
All sites, not just.
Right now, the way that is configured, can we do GED for all states? We would like to do that, but we have to go state by state and get permission to get the records. And so it's possible, excuse me, it's possible. But right now, because of the restrictions from GED testing, we have to do it on a state by state basis. We do have agreements in states that are close by, so we might could work something out with those. Those students who don't directly match, you actually have the ability to go in and mark those students. So for instance, Harold Griffin at the top, if that's the same person on the GED side and the adult ed side, when you approve that match, anything that happens to him on the GED side would then be applied to his adult ed record. Next. We also have, for those of you, well, this is more of a state function also. People with, this is going to be more at the state level where people can go in. If you have a specific data need and you need some information that you can't get, there are ways to get at that data, and that's why I put the ad hoc reporting system on here. This is a state level feature where sometimes there may be a specific data request that's not covered in any of the multiple reports that we have, and you can get to that from there.
Is there a student portal? The answer to that is yes, due to time, and as well as when it's part of the project. We may not be showing that to you today, but we will have that for you when we come for training.
Okay.
You're welcome. I like yay.
And class management. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on class management because class management, basically the concept is you'll create the classes, and we have multiple different ways and parameters to put in information about the class so that we keep it as structured as possible. And I understand that the classes that don't have the same constraints, we're going to have to work around some of that. But this is just a lot of this information in the class section really goes back to the attendance. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of push through that really quickly, if you don't mind. This is the list when you go and look at a class list, for instance. This is one thing I did want to show you. When you look at the classes in your program, you can see a wealth of information about your classes. You can see the class name. You can see who the instructor is, whether or not the class is marked as an interest class. You see the schedule. You see the date that the class begins and ends. You see a student count. This is the active students who are in the class. You can click on that little icon, and it will take you to a list of students in the class. You can click on the hours link on the left-hand side. It takes you directly to enter attendance for that class. That's the basic representation of what your class list is going to look like. And again, there'll be some changes based on what we've learned during the implementation process. We've already seen that slide. We don't need to go back through there. And again, this is just a little deeper dive into the class representation, the class attendance. So I don't really want to belabor this. We've already talked about this. But all the information that you see there is filterable. You can set how it's going to be seen and how it's going to be applied. And student entry, again, this is multiple students as opposed to one student. One thing I didn't mention is when it's approved, you'll see that it's marked in green, which means that those hours have been approved and they're not editable at that point. And there's your confirmation flag that we talked about earlier. Another thing I did not mention during the class is when you're putting attendance entry in, you can actually remove the student from the class if you've reached the end of their participation. You can select remove from the class. Exit date is set as the last date for which attendance was entered. So for this student, the last date of the class would be 9/20. And in this case also, you can mark whether the class is going to be on an official transcript, whether or not you want to give a student a grade for the class. I don't know if you use grades or not, or credits, but you have the option to do that if you want to. So that's all right there at the class. As you're putting the student attendance in, you can also manage the student's participation in the class by removing them from the class and entering their grades, their credits, and add it to the transcript. Some of our advantages for our system. ADVANSYS is the core system. We will work closely with your state to customize the modules that we have in place and also add new modules to meet your specific needs. Is there a question?
Yeah.
Is there?
Yes.
Is there a way to unapprove a contact hour if it's been approved or someone else made a mistake? 5 hours instead of 6. Can we undo that?
It can be undone, and yeah, there are ways to undo it. Again, it depends on the permissions and how far they're going to go with that.
But yes, there is a way to unapprove it if it has been approved.
Yeah, Adam's asking that question. That'll be something that we'll talk about during our first visit out there with you during our discovery.
We'll show that to you, Adam.
Yes.
And then we'll make a determination of how you want to approach that from who's going to have access to approval standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to unapproved.
That could be state or program. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a permission flag based
Yep.
on the role.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we have multiple configurable variables in the system that we'll work with your state to establish. We have testing alerts. It's as simple as whether or not selective service is required. We have some states that require students of a certain age to register for selective service before they're eligible for services. And we can flag that they can't be entered into the system until they've shown proof of selective service. Well, we have hundreds of these literally that we can go through, and we'll go through with your state to determine what's applicable for you and what's not applicable. One of the things that we do is the training. Not only will we come out and do the training initially, we do intend, our plans are always to come at least once a year to do refresher training, to visit with you and make sure that everything's going the way it's supposed to go, to help get new ideas from you. When we release new modules into the system, every time there are changes to Octave, new reports, new reporting guidelines, et cetera, we put those into the system automatically, and then we release them system-wide. And in those cases, we'll often do webinar trainings. And there are also some times that we have, maybe there's new functionality, or maybe we've gone through the ticketing system, we found a particular trend that users are having issues with a certain function in the system, and we'll do a webinar training on that. You know, anything we can do to make your experience better, we're going to be there to do it. And now I believe I'm going to turn it over to the guys, Adam at USBE. I think they have some information they wanted to go over, and then we'll take questions at the end.
So this is Brian Olmstead, and we just want to thank Kevin and the Benchmark team. We are excited about this new system, and as we transition within our Utopia information system. So we wanted to highlight that the trainings are available in Midas right now. So if you are connected to Midas, you should be registering for those. If you are not connected to Midas, work with your program director and get those scheduled. We have 2 trainings, September 24th and 25th. So it's a 2-day training. And again, that's a Monday, Tuesday, and again later that week, the 27th and 28th of September. Both of those trainings will be at the Jordan South Point High School program. So that's the facility, try to remember the south.
It's just off 90th South.
90th South, close to the freeway, right?
Salt Lake Community College campus.
That's right, the Miller campus, yeah. So one thing we noticed as going through the information today, we realized there's going to be a necessity for us to train Utah on some NRS terms. We've kind of coddled the state and protected you from some of this federal language, but we need to become familiar with it. So we'll catch ourselves up on NRS terms and get everybody ready for that. But I wanted to also let you know of a couple important dates. So on September 28th, our current Utopia will shut down at 12 noon. That is when we will do the second data merge to catch up. It's about a 6-week time period. And then on the next Monday, October 1st at 8 a.m., Utopia will go back online, and we will be in the new system, and everything will work perfect.
Yes.
We are positive thinkers. This is going to be great. We're excited about the challenge and the opportunities. I hope you saw a lot of exciting features, because there are things in this system that we have thought of doing for years, but just haven't had the time and capacity of the resources to make it happen. And it would be such a system shift that some things weren't even possible. And so this makes just a lot of changes available to us, and we are excited about the implementation. So I'm going to look at my team here. Anything else that we wanted to share with the group? All right, so I think that's the information from us. Do we have some questions?
Deb, the restart date will be live on October 1st at 8 a.m.
Yes, White's Fort Road, 9301 South White's Fort Road.
Says it's off of Bangor.
Oh, it's not the Miller campus,
Not the
but it
Miller
is one of the
campus.
Slick campuses.
Okay, so the Slick campus, we'll get addresses. It's all when you register on Midas. All of the correct information is there. The correct information is not in my brain.
It's 3400 West about, but it's 9301 South White's Fort Road.
Okay. All right, so we'll go back to the benchmark team.
We'll be glad to take questions at this point. If there's something we can show you that maybe you specifically want to see, if we can possibly show you, we'll be glad to do that. I do understand that there's some nervousness, on the part of the users and et cetera. But we'll be here to help you any way we can to make this as smooth as possible. We're really excited about the opportunity to come out there and to do the trainings and to interact with you guys and learn a little bit about who you are and what you do and show you how we can hopefully make your lives a little better.
One thing to say about the training as well, this is Jenny, just to let you know, it is very interactive. You will be in the development site. We will walk you through step by step how to enter a student, how to enter scores, how to enter attendance, how to run reports. So everything that we've kind of shown you today will actually be in the development site, and you will be able to actually enter data and walk through that process. There's a question about, could you remind us the dates, times, and places of the training again? I believe there are two different sessions. There's one that's the 24th and 25th of September, and there's one the 27th and the 28th. And Adam, can you clarify the location just to make sure?
Yeah, so the location is at the South Point
High
School in Jordan District.
Yeah. 9301 South White's Fort Road, which is about 3400 West.
And those trainings will be from about 8 to 4 o'clock both days.
Yes.
So there's plenty of time to ask questions as we go along.
Yep.
Will the training be in a computer lab, or should we bring our own laptop?
Computer lab.
Yeah, it will be in a computer lab, but if you do have your own computer, we can
accommodate that.
We can accommodate it. It will free up a computer for somebody else. Right now, I pulled the training sign-up list, and we've had 28 on one day, 23 on the other. We have max spots for 50 in both trainings, so we also have some programs that haven't signed up yet. So if you haven't signed up, please sign up. If you don't have a Midas account, contact me. Send me an email with your name and email address, and I will reply back when you have an account made for Midas.
And if you're hunting for it in Midas, the course code is 42880. And type that in the chat box because somebody's going to ask us to repeat it.
Okay.
Thanks, Melissa.
Any other questions? Anything else we can touch on? I mean, we'll be happy to do whatever we can do to make this go smoothly.
Looks like that's it for questions. Again, thanks to Kevin and your team, and we'll just put positive vibes out to the universe.
All right.
Sounds good.
And we have recorded this. I'm going to get this information to Adam, and I believe you're going to post that. Is it in Midas? Is that correct? Or where,
Um,
but wherever you want to. But we have recorded this session, so that information will be available to you.
We will send out an email to the link where we post the session and suggest that people review it. So
Okay.
that'll work.
All right. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much for your time.
Thank you all for your time very much.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you.